Good afternoon. My name is Niehaus. I'm also known as Mpangazitha because I've been given this great honor to be able to carry this name of great Zulu warriors by the Njenje Nguni Council. I have joined the African National Congress 43 years ago in June 1979 at the tender age of 19 years old. It was outside Gaborone, on a small hill, on a kopje. I joined both the ANC and the military wing of the African National Congress, the People's Liberation Army, Umkhonto we Sizwe, because I was absolutely convinced that apartheid had to be fought with all the means available to us, also the armed struggle. I returned to South Africa and I work inside the country, also as part of what Comrade O.R. Tambo called the internal machinery of Umkhonto we Sizwe. I carried out military operations, identified targets, planted limpet mines at various targets, and eventually in 1983, because the cell that I worked with as part of Umkhonto we Sizwe, that was mainly active in the township of Alexandra, was compromised by a spy, I was arrested. I was kept for a long period in solitary confinement at John Foster Square, where I was severely tortured. I lost most of my hearing because of that torture. And after months of solitary confinement, myself and my then fiancé, Yancy Lawrence, were eventually charged with the so-called charge of high treason. We were found guilty by the apartheid court. I was sentenced to a period of imprisonment of 15 years, and Yancy received a 4-year sentence. When eventually I came out of prison 9.5 years later, because the negotiations between the African National Congress and the apartheid regime had started, I immediately continued with my work within the African National Congress. I was honored and privileged to eventually become the national spokesperson of the ANC and also the spokesperson of President Nelson Mandela. I tried to carry out my duties to the best of my ability. The work that I had done is known throughout South Africa and throughout the world. In 1994, I was elected as a Member of Parliament for the African National Congress, and I proudly served in the National Assembly until 1997, when President Nelson Mandela decided to send me to the Netherlands as South Africa's ambassador. I proudly served there, both in bilateral and multilateral capacities, also for a period as the chairperson of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague. And when I returned, I continued my work as a member of the African National Congress. In the period before I went to the Netherlands, I was also elected to be a member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC. And I served in that capacity proudly as one of the youngest members of the National Executive until I became ambassador, and it obviously was no longer possible to also serve on the NEC and be out of the country most of the time. My life has been a dedication to liberation of the people of South Africa, especially Black and African. My commitment when I joined the African National Congress 43 years ago, as I've said there, outside Gaborone on that small hill, was to see the full liberation of all the peoples of South Africa, not just the return of the vote to all South Africans, but also the full economic liberation. In this objective, I've been absolutely consistent. I've spoken out against anyone outside or within the African National Congress that has failed to accept that absolutely important imperative that the majority of people in this country need to be in control of our economy. I've objected to the continuing control of our economy by white monopoly capitalism. I've been consistent in my understanding that the official economic policy program of the ANC, Radical Economic Transformation, has long historical and ideological roots in the history of the ANC, in the various documents, in the strategy and tactic documents of the ANC, and at the basic foundations of radical economic transformation can also be found in the 10 clauses of the Freedom Charter. So my commitment to radical economic transformation has never been self-centered, it has never been factional, it has never been anti-organization. It has always been rooted within the overall historical liberation task of the African National Congress and understanding of radical economic transformation as absolutely critical for the implementation of a second phase of the national democratic revolution. Also an understanding that radical economic transformation, as it was adopted in the resolutions of the 53rd and 54th national conferences of the ANC, respectively in Mangaung and at Nasrec in Johannesburg, are a true reflection of the ANC's economic policy as it has organically and organizationally developed over decades, and that it reflects the hopes, the needs, and the ultimate liberation objectives of the vast majority of South Africans. That the African National Congress always has to be a pro-poor organization, representative of the majority of Black and African poor and working class people, and that any failure to do so and to be an organization of that nature is indeed the failure to execute the historical duty and task of the African National Congress. It is in that context that I've spoken out for radical economic transformation, that I've objected to the selling out of the African National Congress by anyone who is trying to lead us down the road of new liberalism and economic imperialism. I've objected to the decisions that have been taken and executed by the current administration of Cyril Ramaphosa. I've also objected to the manner in which the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress was elected at the 54th National Conference, because that election was done with the assistance of over R1 billion of bribe money by Cyril Ramaphosa and his acolytes. That is in utter and total contravention of the ANC's constitution. I've supported letters that have been written to the Secretariat of the African National Congress in the course of the past 5 years, demanding that Cyril Ramaphosa and those who've made themselves guilty of vote buying had to be charged and disciplined before the National Disciplinary Committee of the ANC. Those letters have not received the desired reception by the National Executive Committee of the ANC, and that is hugely regrettable. This is the context within which I've been informed that I have received nominations by several branches throughout the country to make myself available as a member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC. I've carefully considered those nominations and also the numerous calls that I have received from comrades in the African National Congress throughout the country, requesting me to avail myself to serve on the National Executive Committee of the ANC. After due consideration and with the understanding that no one can nominate yourself to become a member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC, that leaders are not self-appointed, but they have to organically be brought to the fore by the membership of the African National Congress, I have, with humility and with gratefulness, decided to accept the nominations that have been brought out by branches throughout the country in my favor. I do so not with arrogance. I do so also with the understanding that these nominations brings to me a huge duty and task to continue to talk out against any breaking of the true character and nature of the African National Congress, against any diversions from the true historical task and duty that the ANC has. That the trust that had been placed in me and other comrades who carry the same views, who believe in the same objectives, has placed a huge responsibility on our shoulders. So I accept the nomination with humility, with gratitude, and at the same time, with an unequivocal commitment to continue along the road that I've walked since 1979, when I joined the African National Congress. A road in which I was absolutely consistent about the need for full liberation of our people, also economic liberation. I also commit and promise to those who've given their trust to me that I will not betray. I will not suddenly start talking in compromised terms. I will not suddenly start talking with a forked tongue. I will not suddenly become something else if I'm given the great honor to once again serve on the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress. Let me clarify a number of issues because I've been made aware that there's malicious propaganda being spread with regards to my membership of the ANC. I'm a full member of the African National Congress in good standing. I've got the right to call myself a veteran because I am over 60 years old and I've served uninterruptedly in good standing as a member of the ANC over 40 years. In fact, as I've said, I've served for 43 years. Last year, there was a failed attempt by this compromised National Executive Committee of the ANC to bring disciplinary charges against me because they did not like the criticisms that I've expressed about the totally wrong and illegal decision by the Constitutional Court to impose a 15-month prison sentence on President Jacob Zuma. I addressed a press conference on behalf of the Umkhonto weSizwe Military Veterans Association outside the Nkandla residence of President Jacob Zuma on the 4th of July last year, 2021, in which I said that that particular action by the majority of judges of the Constitutional Court, because remember, it was not a unanimous decision, it was a majority judgment. There was also a very critical minority judgment. But that judgment was a reflection of the manner in which the Constitutional Court had been captured, and that our judiciary must be severely criticized for having acted illegally, for not having taken international law into consideration, and trying to abuse customary laws and common law in order to influence the Constitutional Court and our Constitution and the judgments that must be taken on the basis of our Constitution. After a month, the charges that were supposedly to have been brought against me were not filed. The suspension that went with that initial threat to charge me of 1 month expired because the ANC's constitution states very clearly that if one is suspended pending a charge, and those charges are not, in fact, brought against you within 30 days, the suspension lapses. So my suspension lapsed, and I'm not being charged. In recent times, there had now been 3 efforts by this compromised National Executive Committee of the ANC and the reconfigured National Disciplinary Committee of the ANC, loaded with Cyril Ramaphosa accolades, to again bring charges against me. They have tried to arraign me in front of the National Disciplinary Committee and to bring witnesses against me. At 3 different instances, they failed dismally. At 3 different instances, they were supposed to have brought witnesses. At one point, they were going to bring Gwede Mantas, the chairperson of the African National Congress. He was not prepared to do so. They were going to bring the desperately ill Comrade Jessie Duarte, but sadly she passed on. May her soul rest in peace. And of course, she could not be a witness. At a recent hearing 3 weeks ago, they tried to bring Fikile Mbalula. Fikile Mbalula managed to escape, so to speak. He did not present himself. He did not even present an apology. So as I'm sitting here, the continuing farcical efforts to get me charged continues. But I'm not suspended. No suspension has again been brought against me. And as I'm talking to you here, I'm talking to you as a full member of the African National Congress in good standing, who is a member of Ward 6 of the Balitu branch of the ANC, in the Greater Kwadakuza sub-region, in the General Kazinga, Mapanza region. So here I am. I'm prepared to serve. I accept your nomination and all of those who have stood up in branch meetings, who had the courage to stand up and call out my name and nominate me. I accept the nomination. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I promise you that the Carl Mpangazitha Niehaus, that you have seen over the years, who you got to know as someone who is outspoken, who doesn't mince his words, who's not scared of taking on those who betray the objectives and the ideals for liberation that the African National Congress should stand for, that Carl Niehaus will not change. I will not suddenly shed this skin of radicalism and become some kind of compromised fellow because I've been given a position on the National Executive Committee of the ANC. If through your efforts, through your trust, and through your encouragement, I do manage to become elected onto the National Executive Committee of the ANC, I will continue to serve you, the people of this country, and the ideals of the ANC uncompromisingly. I will continue to talk out against sellouts such as Cyril Ramaphosa and those with him. I will continue to call our major enemy in South Africa by the name. I will call a spade a spade. I will continue to say that white monopoly capitalism is our major enemy and that we need to continue to fight it. That on the international scene, Western European and United States of American imperialism is our most important enemy, and we need to continue to fight them. I will continue to express my strong support for South Africa's continued membership of BRICS and alliances with those countries in the world that are not part of imperialism, colonialism, and new colonialism. I want to conclude by thanking every single member of the ANC who continues to stand on principle, who are not prepared to allow your principles to be compromised, who do not allow yourself to be bought by bribes. In fact, even though you are poor, even though you are in need, you are not prepared to accept bribes. You are not prepared to sell your principles. You're not prepared to sell the future birthright of your children for the proverbial mug of lentil soup. I thank you for your support. I reach out in gratitude, and I commit myself to serve, and to serve without any fear and without any favor. You are my comrades. When I was a young man, saw the ravages of apartheid. I became convinced that apartheid had to be fought. I walked the streets of the townships. I made sure that I could fight against apartheid by also joining the People's Liberation Army. I paid the price. My own white Afrikaner family rejected. But I was embraced by so many of my fellow comrades. I've always said, and I want to state it now again, I have no other family but the African National Congress. I have no other home but the ANC. I have no other place to live out my ideals, my commitment to the liberation struggle, not just my political life, because also my personal life, than the ANC. My family, myself, my children, my dear beloved Noluthando, my life partner, all of us are ANC, as the Dutch say, in bone and marrow. Our blood is black, green, and gold. So I'm here to serve. I'm here to serve as a loyal, dedicated, historically well ingrained, ideologically well schooled cadre of O.R. Tambo, of Chris Hani, of Harry Gwala, of Jacob Zuma. With those words, I want to conclude this short message of accepting my nomination for the National Executive Committee of the African National Congress. And I conclude, as I always do, with that great international revolutionary slogan, a luta continua. Thank you.